How I learned to say no and get my life back. The day I decided to set my limits and change my life forever. I don't know exactly how to begin this without sounding like I'm exaggerating, but I need to get everything out of my system that day. I woke up with the weight of the world on my shoulders, the same weight I'd carried every day for years. My body felt heavy, almost paralyzed, as if every muscle was tired from so much effort no one recognized. The house seemed bigger and colder than ever, and the sound of my own breathing seemed too loud. I looked in the mirror, saw my eyes puffy from sleep, and suddenly a silent rage began to boil inside me. It was rage at myself for still subjecting myself to all of this, for continuing to be responsible for a family that only knew how to take, demand, and criticize. My head was spinning with bills, demands, and that constant feeling that I wasn't enough, that I would never be appreciated. I tried to remember the last moment I felt truly free, but I couldn't. Everything came flooding back in that instant. Every fake smile I'd had to give, every excuse I'd made for my parents and siblings, every penny I'd given without receiving anything but demands. And I still had that feeling that something inside me needed to change, but I didn't know how or where to start. My name is Marlon, I'm 34 years old, and for a long time I lived at the mercy of my own family. I'm their main breadwinner, and because of that I'm exploited and devalued every day. I've worked since I was young, working overtime and working in jobs I don't like, just to make sure everyone has what they need. But the truth is, no one ever recognized my efforts. My mother, who should have been supportive and loving, always had a ready critique. My father became indifferent, and my brothers only knew how to criticize. And in the midst of all this, I felt increasingly alone, with no one to truly listen to me. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and despair that overwhelmed me, and at the same time, a glimmer of hope that began to emerge when I met Monica. She had nothing to do with that world. She came from a different reality, with freedom, with her own business, and she treated me as if I truly mattered. For the first time in a long time, I felt I could be myself without fear of judgment. But reality soon set in. My family would never accept that relationship, and I had to decide whether I would continue to be their prisoner or whether I would finally take action to change my life. That day started like any other, but there was something different in the air. When I walked into the kitchen and saw my mother complaining about how I'd left the dishes in the sink, I felt my patience snap. It wasn't just the dishes, it was everything she said, every cutting word reminding me of how much I'd failed as a son, as a provider. My brother showed up soon after, asking to borrow money again, and I nearly lost my voice as I told him I couldn't help him. They didn't understand that I was already giving my all, that my own life was becoming a daily sacrifice. And it was in that moment that I realized that anger hadn't destroyed me, but had given me clarity. I could no longer live like this, being drained emotionally and financially. But at the same time, fear paralyzed me. Fear of being alone, fear of disappointing them, fear that guilt would crush me for making decisions that would alienate me from my family. It's strange to feel fear and freedom at the same time, but that's exactly what was happening to me at that moment. It was then that I remembered Monica, and the mere thought of her brought a mixture of relief and nervousness. She was my anchor, my safe space amidst the chaos. I remembered every laugh we shared, every moment I felt valued and respected. And no matter how much my family dragged me down, no matter how much they looked at me with disapproval, I knew I needed that love, that companionship that demanded nothing more than who I truly was. It was scary, because accepting it meant facing their fury, feeling the weight of their criticism, and perhaps losing people who had never valued my presence. But in that moment, feeling my heart race, I realized the time had come to choose for myself. I could no longer postpone it. The tension within me transformed into a kind of silent strength, an impulse that said, "You deserve more. You deserve to be happy your way." I felt my entire body tremble as I realized this was the turning point. Each heavy breath seemed to mark the moment I would finally stop being held hostage by others' expectations. I thought of all the times I'd felt worthless, that I'd cowered in the face of unfair demands, that I'd ignored my own desires to maintain peace in the family, and I realized that for the first time, I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to feel my life was my own, even if it meant facing fights, confrontations, and perhaps temporary loneliness. Clarity suddenly struck me. I didn't need their approval to live, and I didn't need to hide from my feelings for Monica. For the first time, I felt a mixture of fear, anger, relief, and hope that was almost physical. It was as if every muscle, every thought, and every emotion aligned to give me courage. And in that moment, as I stared at the kitchen door and felt the judgmental stares, I made the decision that my life would no longer be defined by the weight of family exploitation, but by the possibility of experiencing something true and my own. After I made that decision, I felt a mixture of adrenaline and fear I'd never felt before. It was as if all the exhaustion, frustration, and weight of the years had exploded inside me at once. I knew my family's reaction would be intense, that they might yell, make me feel guilty, or even humiliate me in front of everyone. But something inside me told me it was now or never. I needed to prove to myself that I could choose my own happiness, that I could set boundaries, and that I deserved respect. And it wasn't just for Monica, although she was a huge reason. It was for myself, for everything I'd silently endured, for all the times my voice had been muffled and my presence ignored. I felt like crying and screaming at the same time, something so intense it physically hurt. It was as if my entire body reacted to the decision to change, as if my soul finally realized it no longer needed to carry that burden alone. When I finally found Monica, I felt an immediate relief, as if a part of me that had been buried for years had been resurrected. She looked at me and realized, without me having to say anything, that something inside me had changed. And in that moment, all the insecurities, all the pressure from my family, all the judgments faded a little. For the first time, I felt like someone truly saw me, someone who valued me for who I was, and not just what I could offer. That feeling gave me the strength to face what was to come. I knew that when I got home, I would have to confront my mother and brother and possibly deal with anger, tears, and disapproval. But now I felt a different energy. It was no longer just fear. It was also determination. Determination to live by my principles, to not allow myself to be manipulated, and to finally put my happiness first. Arriving home was a test. The tension was almost palpable. My brother came asking for money, and my mother began her knee-jerk criticisms. But this time I took a deep breath and spoke firmly, without yelling, without crying, simply, clearly. I can't do this for you anymore. It's not fair, and I won't carry this guilt anymore. It was strange to feel the silence afterward, their shock. For the first time, I felt in control of the situation, that my words carried weight, and that I didn't need to apologize for taking care of myself. The feeling of relief was accompanied by fear, but I knew I had made the right decision. Every step of that confrontation showed me that change wouldn't be easy, but it would be liberating. I finally understood that being strong didn't just mean enduring, but also knowing when to say no, when to protect yourself, and when to prioritize what truly matters, myself. The anger that had previously overwhelmed me began to transform into clarity. I realized that my life didn't need to be defined by others, that I had the right to choose who I associated with and how I lived my life. The feeling of being the master of my own path gave me a strength I didn't know existed within me. Every word I said to my family, every firm look, every gesture of autonomy made me feel more alive, more self-aware. For the first time, I felt that happiness wasn't something distant or impossible, but something I could build, even if only little by little. And most importantly, I wasn't alone. Monica was by my side, supporting me, reminding me that true love doesn't require extreme sacrifice or submission, only respect and companionship. When I finally closed the door on the day to reflect alone, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and peace I hadn't felt in years. My body still trembled with tension, my mind still processed the intensity of that moment, but there was something different. Hope. Hope that I could rebuild my life, that I could be valued and respected, that I could love and be loved without fear or guilt. I realized that facing my family had not only been an act of courage, but an act of self-love. For the first time, I felt my life had perspective, that I no longer needed to hide behind imposed responsibilities or fear of judgment. And even though I knew that not everyone would understand, that some wounds would still take time to heal, I felt that day marked a turning point, a day when I stopped being held hostage by what others wanted and began to own my own story. In the days that followed, I realized that what seemed like a single act of courage had triggered a massive internal shift. Every time my mother or brother tried to pressure me, I felt a newfound strength within me. It was strange to realize that my voice, which had previously trembled with fear or guilt, now held weight. I still felt anger, still felt that old frustration, but I could see the difference between responsibility and exploitation. For the first time, I knew that taking care of myself wasn't selfish, and that setting boundaries was necessary for emotional survival. I could love my family without losing myself in the process. This clarity was liberating, yet still frightening. Each small confrontation taught me resilience, and each small gesture of autonomy reminded me that I deserved respect, that my happiness mattered. Monica was fundamental in this process, not because she had answers for everything, but because she showed me that I didn't have to carry the world alone. She listened to me without judgment, reminded me of my achievements and how much I had endured up to that point, and most importantly, she reminded me that love isn't about extreme sacrifice, but about partnership. Every conversation with her was like a balm, a reminder that I didn't need to shrink from family pressure. And little by little, I began to realize that my life could have a different color, that I no longer needed to live in the gray of guilt or obligation. I was still tired, still feeling the weight of years of exploration, but there was a new light, a possible path that had previously seemed unattainable. There was one particular day when everything became crystal clear to me. I was alone at home, reflecting on my life, on all the times I'd been blamed for not being enough, for not meeting unrealistic expectations. And it was at that moment that I felt for the first time a mixture of anger and relief so intense it almost brought me to tears. Anger at all the years I'd allowed myself to be treated like an object, and relief at finally having the chance to say no, to make my own decisions. That night was decisive. I realized that my worth didn't depend on their approval, that I no longer needed to live according to other people's expectations. It was painful, yes, because I still loved my family, but also liberating because I finally understood that I didn't have to lose myself in the process. I began to gradually reorganize my life, establishing clear boundaries. Each step was small but incredibly meaningful. I refused to lend money unnecessarily or meet unreasonable demands, and I began investing my time and energy in myself and Monica. There were still moments of doubt, moments of fear, because breaking such ingrained patterns is never easy, but the feeling of being in control was so strong that it gave me the courage to continue. For the first time, I felt that my choices had a real impact on my happiness, and this was more powerful than any criticism or external pressure. It was during this period that I realized how overcoming adversity isn't a straight line. There are days when the weight of the past returns, when family criticism still echoes in my mind, but now I can face them with awareness. Change doesn't mean forgetting or ceasing to love. It means learning to live by my own rules, to value my effort and my right to be happy. Each small step, each firm decision, each moment of courage taught me that life can be different, that I can love without sacrificing myself, and that I can finally begin to write my own story. And even though the road is still long, I feel I've finally found a direction worth following. Little by little, I realized that my relationship with my family was changing, not because they had become better people, but because I had changed the way I viewed everything. Before, every demand, every criticism would completely tear me down. Now, I could feel anger without drowning in it, feel frustration without losing myself, and feel love without nullifying myself. It was a slow process, and I won't lie. There were moments of doubt and fear that I was making the wrong choice. But each small victory, each instance in which I maintained my limits without feeling guilty, strengthened me further. I began to realize that I didn't need their approval to feel worthy. This was both liberating and terrifying because it meant taking full responsibility for my own happiness. I still remember a specific moment when my mother tried to manipulate me emotionally. She began telling me I was ungrateful and that I would never truly care about them if I continued this way. Previously, this would have shaken me deeply, but that day, I took a deep breath and firmly replied, "Yes, I do care, but I can't live with constant guilt anymore. I need to live my life too." The feeling that came afterward was strange and new. There was no yelling, no tears, just silence and my own sense of autonomy. I realized I was finally learning to deal with family in a healthy way, without sacrificing myself or losing my essence. Monica's presence continued to be a vital support. Her every gesture, every word, every display of trust reminded me of how capable I was of being happy outside of that cycle of family exploitation. I began to allow myself small moments of joy that had previously seemed impossible. Going out to dinner without guilt, planning trips without fear, laughing without feeling like I was betraying imposed responsibilities. It was liberating to realize that I could balance love and responsibility, that I could be a partner without losing myself, and that I could set boundaries without ceasing to be a child. That sense of balance was new, and at the same time, extremely empowering. One of the most significant moments was when I realized that overcoming wasn't about eliminating pain or anger, but about learning to live with them constructively. I still felt hurt by everything I'd been through, but now I could use it as strength to avoid repeating patterns, to protect myself, and to value what was truly important. Every firm decision I made to defend my own emotional life taught me something about resilience and self-worth. It was a hard but necessary lesson, and each small achievement became a giant step toward the freedom I'd been seeking for years. The most significant moment was realizing that I no longer needed to be a prisoner of other people's opinions to feel complete. For the first time, I felt that my happiness depended solely on me, my choices, my limits, and my courage to live authentically. Of course, there were still challenges and open wounds, but the weight had lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it was possible to build a life I truly wanted. It was a mixture of relief, fear, hope, and strength I had never felt before. And that night, alone or with Monica, I felt I was finally ready to write my own story, raw, true, and uniquely mine. In the following days, I noticed my life beginning to have a different rhythm. I still lived with my family, but no longer as before, submissive and carrying guilt. Each encounter was different. I could hear criticism without internalizing it. I could speak out without fear, and most importantly, I could feel that my choices were valid. The freedom to act according to my own values was something I had never experienced so intensely. Feeling that my life was finally under my control was both terrifying and exciting, because it meant taking full responsibility for my happiness, something I had never consciously done. Monica continued to be my support and my reflection, showing me that true love doesn't diminish, oppress, or manipulate. With her, I learned to trust myself and believe that I could have a balanced life. I realized I no longer had to choose between happiness and responsibility because I could now set boundaries, care for those I love, and still respect myself. This change didn't come from a magical moment, but from small daily decisions, constant courage, and looking within without fear. Every step I took reminded me that change was possible, even in the face of years of exploitation and devaluation. It was incredible to realize that the weight I'd carried for years was beginning to dissolve. There were still old pains, memories of frustration and hurt, but now they no longer defined me. I could feel love without fear, anger without self-destruction, and hope without expecting approval. Every step I took to free myself from my family's expectations was a step toward my own authenticity. And even with the pain that still lingered, I realized that being able to live my feelings and my choices without guilt was a form of enormous victory, something that had previously seemed impossible. Today, I feel like my life finally has perspective. I still grapple with painful memories and the need to maintain clear boundaries. But now I can see how resilient and capable I am of transformation. Every firm decision, every emotional confrontation, every act of self-care has become a building block in the construction of a life I can call my own. I feel like, for the first time, I can look to the future with clarity and hope, knowing that even if my family never understands or accepts everything, I can still be happy and live authentically. Today, I can look back on everything I've been through with a mixture of pain and pride. Pain from the hardships, the exploitation, the disrespect, but pride for having found the strength to say no, for having sought my own happiness, and for having allowed myself to love without losing myself. I know the journey continues, that there will still be challenges, but now I feel I can face them with courage and awareness. Overcoming doesn't mean everything is perfect, but it does mean I've found a real, human, and possible path to living my life truthfully. And that, for me, is more than enough to feel hope and peace.